Do you believe the world can still be saved? That, amidst human evil, nature can become the guardian of innocence? Most people don't know this, but one of the most moving and unbelievable stories of recent years took place in a forgotten village in Ethiopia, and it wasn't a human being who saved a 12-year-old girl from the terror of kidnapping and forced marriage. It was 3 lions. Yes, you heard right. 3 wild animals who, contrary to everything science teaches, acted with more empathy, compassion, and courage than humans themselves. This story isn't a fairy tale. It's a punch in the gut for those who still believe certain traditions should be upheld for the sake of culture. It's also irrefutable proof that love, kindness, and emotional intelligence can come in the most unlikely forms. A girl ripped from her home, held captive, about to be forced to marry a stranger, and saved by creatures who supposedly should pose a threat. But what happened on that 7th day will challenge everything you think you know about instinct, morality, and humanity. Prepare to learn the story that stopped the world, made international headlines, and exposed a truth no one wants to face. Sometimes, it's the jungle itself that rises up against human barbarity. And what you'll see here isn't just a tale of survival, it's a call, an inspiration. An answer you've perhaps been searching for a long time. There's still light where you least expect it. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to hear the roar of truth. In the heart of a village surrounded by the golden plains and timid hills of rural Ethiopia, lived a 12-year-old girl named Alem. Her name, which means the world in Amharic, already said a lot about her. It was as if she carried within her an entire universe of empathy, hope, and an immense desire to understand life. Alem woke every day before sunrise, helped her mother grind the grain for injera, and her eyes shining with curiosity, ran barefoot through the fields to the small schoolhouse made of mud and banana leaves. She dreamed of being a teacher, not for the prestige, but for a reason that seemed greater. She wanted to teach other girls not to be afraid to think, to question, to dream. Her routine was marked by simplicity, but also by an abundance of affection, mutual respect, and generosity. The family, though impoverished, cultivated the power of kindness as a daily ritual, and this shaped Alem's character as steadily as the wind sculpted the region's mountains. Alem grew up as a living portrait of a dreamy childhood, enveloped in compassion and nourished by stories told by lamplight, where her grandparents blended local myths with lessons on courage, wisdom, and the importance of gratitude. In one of these tales, her grandfather spoke of mountain lions, not as predators, but as symbols of protection and emotional intelligence, appearing only to the pure of heart. The girl listened to everything with wide eyes and a pounding heart, and always made a point of repeating, "When I grow up, I'm going to teach these stories to everyone." She was the kind of girl who picked up a pencil tenderly, drew flowers in her math notebooks, and cried when she saw her classmates going hungry. She was afraid, yes, fear of loneliness, of loss, of the unknown, but she also had an immense faith that everything had a purpose, even that which hurt. And there, in that hot, arid, and vibrant land, a consciousness blossomed that combined altruism and insight, well beyond the age suggested by her scraped knees and braided hair. At school, she was known not only for her intelligence, but for the way she resolved conflicts with a maturity that bordered on inspiration. Once, when 2 boys fought over a piece of bread, she didn't just share hers, she made them share the moments learning. And so, without realizing it, Alem taught about forgiveness, humanity, and collaboration with small but profoundly transformative gestures. Her teacher, who walked more than 3 hours a day to teach, said she had the rare initiative to ask why and not settle for empty answers. When asked about the future, Alem didn't talk about leaving the village. She wanted to stay. There are so many good people here who just need a chance. Her sincerity was disarming, her humility rare, and even faced with the typical difficulties of rural life, water shortages, food insecurity, the absence of electricity. She saw the world as a great adventure, where overcoming came from within, like a silent light. But like the leaves that suddenly fall in the hot Sahel wind, not all light is eternal. It was a night like so many others in Alem's village, but fate, with its merciless coldness, was already whispering in the wind that something was about to change. The full moon hung over the trees like a silent witness as the girl fell asleep. Beside her mother, her dreams still fresh from the stories she had heard before bed. She dreamed of a bigger school, of colorful books, of a world where no girl would have to be silent out of fear. But that night, the peace was shattered by hurried footsteps, shadows cutting through the darkness, and voices muffled by cruel urgency. 3 men broke into the house with calculated brutality. Alem woke with one of their hands covering her mouth, her heart racing, her soul begging for understanding. She was taken by force, wrapped in a coarse cloth, her eyes wide in terror, trying to understand why this was happening. Fear froze her body, but it didn't silence her mind, which screamed for protection, for affection, for a solution that never came. The road they took her was dusty, silent, as if nature itself were paralyzed by the cowardice of the act. Alem couldn't cry. It was as if her soul had retreated, seeking a safe place within itself. Amidst the darkness, the men talked about marriage, as if discussing some sort of negotiation, completely ignoring the humanity of that child ripped from her mother's arms. The cruelty there came not only from their actions, but from a lack of empathy, a disregard for childhood and dignity. And in that moment, the girl understood what so many others before her had learned, that fear can be a slow poison, eroding confidence, courage, and even hope. But she also learned that there was something inside her that the aggressors couldn't steal: resilience. Even suffocated by insecurity, even torn apart by absence, something in her gaze still searched for meaning, still believed that love, compassion, and emotional intelligence could be greater than brutality. In the first hours of her captivity, Alem was thrown into an isolated hut made of rustic wood and a tin roof where the darkness seemed solid. Her kidnappers watched her with cold eyes, as if her pain were invisible. They tried to convince her, through threats and emotional blackmail, that marrying a much older man was a custom, a tradition. But not even their words, disguised as culture, could hide their perversity. The girl, though frightened, silently questioned, if this is love, why does it hurt so much? In those moments, loneliness was an abyss, but the memory of her father smiling, her mother singing as she made coffee, was her only refuge. And even trembling, even oppressed, she maintained a spark of hope, because she knew that life, however unfair, sometimes offers unlikely paths to liberation. And so, even as she heard the distant cries of nocturnal animals and the echo of her own breath, Alem clung to something greater than herself: faith in kindness, justice, and the wisdom that only those who truly love possess. The following days were a plunge into the abyss. 7 days may seem short to those who live them in the comfort of routine, but for Alem, each hour was an eternity suspended between fear and resistance. The hut where she was imprisoned was stuffy, reeking of damp earth and sweat, with a corner where a makeshift rope restricted her movement. The kidnappers, alternating between threatening silences and manipulative speeches, tried to break her resistance. They observed her as if examining merchandise coldly, without compassion, without any trace of humanity. The girl cried, yes, but she did so inwardly, so as not to give them the taste of her pain. And even there, even as a child in captivity, she found refuge in memories of sunny days, her mother's tight hugs, her younger brother's infectious laughter. It was in these memories that she strengthened her courage, her perseverance, and something more: the belief that one day this suffering would become history, not a sentence. Over the course of the week, signs of trauma began to appear like cracks in a freshly painted wall. Alem lost her appetite, shivered even when she wasn't cold, and her speech became slurred, as if each word required superhuman strength. One of the kidnappers, older and quiet, seemed to hesitate at times, as if he saw in her something that reminded him of his own daughter. This was the man who, one night, left a piece of softer bread and a bottle of clean water beside her. It was little, but it showed that, even in chaos, sparks of humanity still exist. Alem clung to that gesture like a castaway clings to a piece of wood. In that gesture, she saw a thread of empathy, a crack in the cruelty. And that was enough to rekindle her confidence that someone would find her. Alem clung to that gesture, like a castaway clings to a piece of wood. In that gesture, she saw a thread of empathy, a crack in the cruelty. And that was enough to rekindle her confidence that someone would find her. Fear still lingered in her chest, how could it not? But now it shared space with the precocious wisdom that even in the deepest darkness, kindness can manifest itself as a small light. On the last night before the improbable, Alem almost gave up. She was weak, feverish, her eyes sunken and her thoughts jumbled. She felt alone, as if the world had forgotten her. And there, between the dirt floor and the tin ceiling, she had a silent conversation with herself. You will hold on. For yourself. For your mother. For the other girls. It was a kind of prayer, a call to her own resilience. It was altruism manifesting itself in the form of purpose. If she survived, she would fight for other children. She didn't know how or when, but she would. Because even if her childhood had been ripped away from her, she would not allow them to rob her of the ability to love, to forgive, and to transform pain into strength. And it was with this thought that, at dawn on the seventh day, still unaware, Alem was about to witness the inexplicable, an act of nature and mystery that no human would have dared to foresee. The silence of that early morning was different. It wasn't the natural silence of rural nights, but an emptiness laden with foreboding. Alem's mother woke with a chill in her stomach, the kind that can't be explained, only felt. When she opened her eyes and didn't see her daughter lying beside her, the anguish became almost physical. She screamed for her, searched the corners of the house, ran through the yard, and within minutes, was knocking on the neighbors' doors. The commotion spread like wildfire through tall grass. The family, united by affection and faith, wasted no time. Even with his heart crushed by insecurity, the father went straight to the police station in the nearest town. Facing a 3-hour drive, heavy dust, and no certainty. He wasn't just carrying a complaint, he was carrying the pain of an entire community that for decades had faced the fear of losing their girls to forced marriage. But this time was different. It was his daughter. And he was willing to move the world to bring her back. The police station was modest, with peeling walls and dusty filing cabinets. But the eyes of the officer who responded to him were not blind to the father's pain. He was a young officer with a young daughter of his own. Upon hearing the report, he stood up immediately, ignoring the bureaucratic paperwork. The search began right there, with phone calls to neighboring villages, conversations with residents, and surveys of local suspects. Alem's mother, despite her grief, organized search parties with neighbors, while her older brothers walked little-used trails, guided by hope and confidence that the girl was still alive. Solidarity blossomed spontaneously. People who barely knew the family began to show up to help. Women who had already lost daughters to the same crime came and told their stories, joining forces. The village became a center of collaboration and empathy. It was the community, often forgotten by the state, taking the initiative and demonstrating the true meaning of humanity and courage. Despite all their efforts, the days passed slowly, as if time were mocking their pain. Each morning dawned with the hope of good news, and each night fell with the weight of frustration, but no one gave up. An old local shepherd, known for his perspicacity and wisdom, suggested searching wooded areas where criminals often hid. The police accepted. And it was there, on the seventh day, that the impossible began to unfold. A search party, led by police officers and volunteers, heard strange sounds coming from deep within the forest. At first, they thought it was an animal, but then they saw footprints, both human and those of something much larger. And before they could imagine what they were about to find, they felt that chill down their spine that precedes moments that change everything. It was as if fate itself was sending them signs. And without even knowing it, they were about to encounter not only the girl, but something that would challenge all their concepts of fear, protection, and hope into question. In that moment, as the sun's heat filtered through the treetops, Alem could no longer distinguish between dream and reality. Her exhausted body begged for rest, but her mind fought against giving up. She was alone. The kidnappers had left, perhaps in search of supplies, perhaps to plan their next move. Sitting against the wall of the hut, her knees drawn up and her gaze lost, she silently repeated words of strength, as if calling out to something greater: resilience, courage, hope. It was at that moment that she heard the sound, a soft but powerful rustling, then a snap of branches. Alem thought it was the men returning, and her heart sank. But instead, from the forest, 3 majestic silhouettes emerged, 3 lions. Yes, lions. A young male and 2 females walking imposingly, as if they knew exactly where they were going. And then, the unlikely happened. They didn't roar. They didn't run. They simply approached slowly, stopping a few meters from the girl, as if they recognized her. Alem didn't scream. Fear was replaced by a strange sense of welcome. Those golden eyes didn't show hunger, but something different: curiosity, watchfulness, perhaps compassion. The lions surrounded her, yes, but kept their distance. They sat around her like silent guardians. And that was when the miracle took shape. Hours later, when the kidnappers returned, carrying bags and chatting among themselves, they came face to face with the unexpected, the 3 felines between them and the girl. The shock was immediate. One of them let out a shrill scream. Another dropped everything on the ground. The lions slowly rose. They didn't attack, but walked toward the men with firm, measured steps, almost as if to say, "You are not welcome." Here, that instinctive silent language was enough. The men ran away, abandoning the place. And the lions, as if they had fulfilled an ancient mission, returned to Alem. She wept. But now she wept with relief, with emotion, because she couldn't believe that nature had become her shield. This encounter, still inexplicable under the cold logic of science, rekindled in all who heard the story a belief in the invisible in Phaeon, the inexplicable bond between humanity and nature. For Alem, the presence of the lions represented more than safety. It represented wild love, the kind that protects without asking for anything in return. It represented kindness in its most instinctive form. And even without understanding how or why, she knew she was being cared for. The image of those 3 animals there, silent and attentive, became a symbol. A reminder that, amidst human wickedness, there are greater forces at work, forces that recognize innocence, purity, the value of life. And as the sun set behind the mountains, tinting the sky with shades of copper and amber, Alem, sitting among the lions, discovered a rare truth. Sometimes, salvation comes from where you least expect it. And it was in this surreal scene that the first echoes of hope began to touch the hearts of those still on their way. Night fell slowly, like a veil of silence over the forest. But in that clearing forgotten by men, something sacred was happening. Alem, still sitting among the lions, no longer felt the fear she once felt. Her weariness gave way to a strange peace. The 3 felines, now lying around her, formed a living wall between her and the world. The wind carried the scents of the forest, the distant sound of nocturnal birds, and the warmth of the lions' bodies gave her a sense of shelter that no blanket could offer. This wasn't just protection, It was as if nature itself recognized her pain and decided to intervene. And even without words, she sensed an ancient intelligence there, a wisdom that science is still trying to decipher. Perhaps it was pure emotional intelligence, without vanity, without ego. And in that shared silence, Alem understood that affection can also roar in silence. It was a wild vigil made of respect and empathy in nearby villages. When the first reports arrived from shepherds, who swore they'd seen a girl surrounded by lions without being attacked, the story spread like wildfire. Some said it was a miracle. Others said the lions had sensed the child's suffering and by some higher instinct decided to protect her. Local beliefs were powerfully awakened. Community elders recalled old proverbs about lions becoming guardians when injustice surpasses the limits of comprehension. Some spoke of a divine force, a protective spirit, a universe intervening in the face of human cruelty. More rational scientists tried to explain. The lions may have mistaken the girl's screams for the meow of a cub. But no theory could erase the commotion generated by that image. A child in a state of absolute vulnerability, being protected by the most feared creatures of the savannah. The duality was powerful and deeply symbolic. For Alem, the hours spent with the lions became a kind of rebirth. It was as if every second there made her recover pieces of her stolen identity. She began to observe their movements, the quiet yawn, the watchful gaze, the way they rose at the slightest noise. She felt part of that small wild clan, united not by blood, but by something even rarer, by a bond of empathy. And it was in this silent vigil that she experienced a kind of healing many will never know. The healing that comes from presence, from gaze, from warmth, from unconditional protection. When dawn broke, she didn't yet know the police were already close. But she knew, deep inside, that she had experienced something that would change the way she saw the world forever. And when the branches moved and the first human footsteps echoed in the forest, the lions rose. And in that solemn gesture, like sentinels who had fulfilled their mission, they prepared to depart. But what no one imagined was the reaction that would come from the reunion of two worlds. The grass, still damp with dew, gave way beneath the officers' boots as they reached the clearing. At the head of the group was the young officer who had promised Alem's family he would find her alive. Upon seeing the scene, everyone stopped. Absolute silence. The girl was sitting on the ground, her hair disheveled, her clothes dirty, but her eyes open and alert, surrounded by 3 lions, who remained motionless like ancient statues. No one dared move. The image was as surreal as it was touching. One of the officers put his hand to his mouth, as if trying to contain his astonishment, while another made the sign of the cross. It was the perfect combination of fear and emotion. Alem looked at them with a mixture of relief and doubt. Was she finally safe? The young officer stepped forward, slowly knelt, and extended his hand wordlessly. At that gesture, Alem wept. A deep cry of liberation, of gratitude, of someone who finally believed in humanity again. The lions, as if understanding the emotion of the moment, calmly rose and began to slowly back away. No roar, no attack, no threatening gesture. Just the elegance of those who had accomplished a mission. When they disappeared into the trees, the officers ran to the girl. One of them wrapped her in his jacket, another offered her water, another wept shamelessly. The human connection there was palpable. More than just completing a task, these men were witnessing a miracle. One of the officers picked up the radio and reported, "We found the girl. She's alive and protected by lions." On the other end of the line, silence. No one knew what to say. It was the kind of story that defies common sense, but at the same time rekindles faith. Meanwhile, a pickup truck was already being dispatched to the scene. And Alem, exhausted, her body frail but her heart strong, held the officer's hand as if holding the world together. When the girl finally reached the village, The sun was already rising high in the sky. The community was gathered in force, waiting for the truck. As she got out of the vehicle, Olem searched for a familiar face. And then she saw them. Her parents ran to her. Her mother fell to her knees before even hugging her. Her father wrapped her in his arms, sobbing like a child. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a collective rebirth. Shouts of joy, applause, prayers. The village children crowded together to see the girl who had conquered the darkness. Olem, still unable to speak, smiled. A shy smile, but full of meaning. And amidst hugs, tears, and promises of protection, a new story was born, that of a girl who, even though kidnapped, never gave up. A girl who was protected by nature, but saved by love from her family, from her community, and from all those who still believe that good always finds a way to triumph. But the impact of what would follow would transcend the village's borders. The story soon crossed the village's borders. Initially, it spread to neighboring regions through whispers, odd reports, and messages on community radio stations. Within days, however, it had crossed Ethiopia's borders and become a global headline. Newspapers from South Africa to Australia, from France to Brazil, reported, "Lions save kidnapped girl in Ethiopia." The story captured more than curiosity, it stirred deep emotions. It was a collision between human horror and the intervention of nature, with an ending as improbable as it was hopeful. Reporters arrived in the village searching for the girl, her family, the police, and the lion's tracks. And the more the story was told, the more it became a symbol of resistance, of compassion, of collective commotion. International human rights organizations embraced the cause. Spiritual leaders spoke of the divine act of the jungle. And in the eyes of the world, Olem became much more than a survivor. She became a message. International media, in reporting the case, shone a light on a reality previously ignored by many: the forced marriage of girls, a practice still prevalent in many regions of the world, including rural Ethiopia. The headlines, despite focusing on lions, began to contextualize the true drama, that of thousands of children, deprived of their childhoods by traditions that violate their freedom. Olem gave a face, a name, and a voice to these statistics. NGOs such as UNICEF, Save the Children, and Human Rights Watch seized on the commotion to intensify campaigns and demand effective action from local governments. And it was in this context of pain and hope that a new wave of solidarity was born. Donations began arriving in the village. Foreigners wrote letters to the girl. Schools committed to addressing the issue. Even animal protection groups got involved, highlighting the atypical behavior of lions as a symbolic call to our collective conscience. The impact, more than sensationalism, generated reflection, empathy, and a desire for real change. On the internet, the story exploded into a phenomenon. Videos about Olem racked up millions of views. Comments in different languages filled social media, with messages like, "This restored my faith in humanity," or "Nature is more compassionate than humans." People shared their own stories of overcoming, inspired by the girl. Digital influencers, activists, and even celebrities began talking about the case. Hashtags like #LionGuardian and #FreeOurGirls went viral. It was as if Alan's story had opened an old wound and at the same time offered a balm. That girl's courage, her emotional intelligence, her perseverance in the face of terror touched millions. And amid this whirlwind of attention, Olem remained silent, still processing everything. But her gaze steady, mature, profound, said more than 1,000 speeches. The girl who once wanted only to teach was now a global inspiration. And this would usher in something even greater. Long before Olem's story crossed oceans, the reality of forced marriage was already a silent burden that crushed childhoods in many villages in Ethiopia. For many girls, marriage was not a choice, but an imposed destiny, often even before puberty. Culture, used as a shield by patriarchal traditions, justified this custom with flimsy and convenient arguments: protection, stability, family honor. But the truth was different. Girls deprived of an education, without the right to their opinion, to their childhood, or to autonomy. Alem's story, with its courage and global commotion, exposed this wound. The Ethiopian government, pressured by the international repercussion, announced stricter investigations and promised to strengthen public child protection policies. Local NGOs, which previously fought almost alone, gained visibility and resources to expand their work. But there was still and still is a long way to go. Wisdom and perseverance needed to be instilled in the villages so that fear and submission could give way to freedom and confidence. Some results began to emerge quickly. In rural schools, girls began to receive more encouragement to continue their studies. In more closed communities, conversation circles led by local women began to spread. These were gatherings where empathy, understanding, and humility opened the way for profound debates. Old community leaders, once resistant, began to rethink old dogmas, pressured by new generations who no longer wanted to see their sisters, cousins, and daughters treated as commodities. In some regions, laws were strengthened, creating harsher punishments for those who attempted to arrange marriages with minors. And as a living symbol of this change, Alem's image began to grace posters, murals, pamphlets, and even textbooks. The girl who survived the lions now roared silently in the pages of education. And the most beautiful thing, this didn't happen by chance, but because of a collaborative network between communities, authorities, educators, and activists driven by love and emotional intelligence. Still, challenges persist. In many villages, access to information remains limited. Poverty fuels the culture of dowry. Gender inequality continues to mark the lives of thousands of girls. That's why stories like Alem's need to be told, not as curiosities, but as tools for transformation. How about a practical example? Teachers can use this case as a starting point to discuss human rights in the classroom. Parents can watch videos about empathy and child protection with their children. Influencers can support campaigns like Girls Not Brides. The solution requires initiative. It requires courage. And above all, it requires humanity. Because every time a girl is prevented from choosing her own path, we lose more than a childhood, we lose a chance to evolve as a society. The fight doesn't end with a symbolic victory. It needs to be daily, firm, and conscious. And the echo of Alem's story continues to reverberate, pushing the world to listen, to feel, to act. In African culture, lions are not just animals, they are archetypes, ancestral symbols of strength, honor, protection, and spirituality. For many people in Ethiopia, encountering a lion in the wild can be a sign of danger, yes, but also of blessing. These wild beings are believed to have connections with invisible forces, with guardian spirits that emerge when there is an imbalance in the human world. In Alem's case, the encounter with the lions took on almost mystical overtones. It was as if nature had intervened directly to correct a human injustice. A pure, courageous, and loving girl, enveloped in the silent embrace of 3 wild guardians. The image resonated not only in the hearts of Ethiopians, but in the souls of people around the world. In times when humanity seems increasingly disconnected from the earth, seeing animals protect a child from humans was a raw, powerful, and necessary lesson about empathy, connection, and respect for the invisible. Orthodox Christian monks in Ethiopia interpreted the event as a divine sign. The Lion of Judah cared for her, they said, referring to the biblical symbolism attributed to Christ. Leaders of animist traditions saw the act as a manifestation of their ancestors, as if ancient spirits, tired of injustice, had sent the felines as messengers. In both cases, the same conclusion was reached. The wild thing showed more compassion than the kidnappers who claimed to be men. A brutal and symbolic contrast. And the most incredible thing is that, Even among biologists and scholars, there was silence. Not of ignorance, but of reverence. Some attempted explanations. The lions were fed. They didn't see her as a threat. They responded to sounds similar to those of cubs. But in the end, everyone admitted there was something here that deviated from the norm. A rare, moving phenomenon that towed the fine line between science and spirituality. And at this intersection, where reason and faith meet, was born the narrative force that transformed Alem's life. This story doesn't end with rescue, with commotion, or even with social change. It lives on in the symbols that surround us, in the moments when we need courage but don't know where to find it. On the days when we feel alone and life sends unexpected signs. A gentle look, a gesture of affection, a voice that listens in silence. What the lions taught us there, without a word, was that the power of kindness transcends languages, species, and even logic. It was a lesson in wild love, in instinctive collaboration, in pure altruism. And perhaps, deep down, this is the call of this entire narrative, to reconnect with what is most human in us, looking with more compassion at others, and with more humility at what we cannot control. Because in the end, perhaps the true lions aren't just in the African jungles, but within us, waiting for the right moment to roar, not with fury, but with love. And now I ask you, how many times have you ignored a call for help because you thought it wasn't your problem? How many girls like Alem are still silent, waiting for anyone to speak up for them? This story is more than moving. It's a mirror, a warning, a call to action. We can no longer pretend we don't see, don't hear, don't feel. If even the lions of the savannah were capable of protecting an innocent life with such wisdom and compassion, why do we, human beings, so often choose to turn our backs? Do you have any idea of the impact one gesture of yours can have? Sharing knowledge, educating your children, questioning unjust traditions, supporting a local NGO, filing an anonymous complaint, creating safe spaces for girls to dream. The solution is in your hands, and it all starts by allowing yourself to feel what you felt when you heard this story. Feel the call it carries, the call for more empathy, for more action, for more humanity. Because true strength lies in those who protect, who welcome, who don't remain silent in the face of injustice. Will you continue to watch, or will you be part of the change? If this story touched you, if it made you reflect, then don't let it die here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear this message. Here, we tell stories that matter. Stories that inspire, that awaken, that make hearts beat faster. And you are a part of this. Let's go together.